So with the new Borderlands 4 trailer, we got to look at a bunch of new gameplay, including a bunch of new action skills for the various Vault Hunters. So in this video, I want to go over all of the different action skills we've been able to glean from not only the newest trailer, but also the first trailer. But we do have to go over a few things first, starting off with that it seems all of the Vault Hunters in Borderlands 4 are going to have multiple different action skills, either to use at the same time or to choose between, similar to Borderlands 3, because when you go back to Borderlands 3, that was the first time you'd be able to choose between different action skills through the different skill trees of every Vault Hunter. Then you also had things like Zane being able to use multiple action skills. And we do see multiple of these new Vault Hunters using different action skills, and presumably all of them will have multiple options, and we already have gotten information that these skill trees for Borderlands 4 will be the biggest in the franchise and the most expansive. So I would expect that we at least have 3 different action skill options for all 4 of these Vault Hunters, potentially even more. And then we have our 4 Vault Hunters themselves, starting with the leftmost guy, who doesn't seem to have anything very specific about them when you're just looking at them, say, walking or in a screenshot, but he seems very interesting when you get into the gameplay, and there's a pretty big theory going around that he's kind of the double character, so he has like double projectiles and double action skills and a bunch of other things we'll go over when we get into the abilities we've seen him use. Then we have the Siren, and she also seems pretty interesting because she seems a bit different than a lot of the other Sirens. She also has these different canisters on her forearm that a lot of people think that's where she kind of uses her powers through, or maybe she stores something that allows her to maybe boost those powers in some way. So there's a bunch of interesting stuff around her, and it's a similar way that most Sirens are pretty interesting. Then we have the really big guy who you would originally think would just be like a big brute of a character, but he's actually pretty interesting because we've seen him use 2 different action skills, and both of them are generated from these little robots he has flying around. In the first trailer and in this new trailer, we see him use 2 different elemental axes that he can throw and presumably melee with, and to generate those, his little robots fly in and create them. And then his other action skill that we'll go over, we also see the little robots kind of coming in and allowing him to do whatever it is. So it seems he's really tied into cybernetics. And then finally, we have this smallest character all the way to the right, and she seems really interesting because a lot of people have been theorizing that she is an ex-maliwan soldier because of the big puffy pants that seems pretty similar to some of the big maliwan suits, and through the ability we got to see her use in this newest trailer, that seems like it may actually be the case, and she may also be able to use all of the different elements at once and potentially apply all status effects at once. So if that ends up being the case, she may be the first character I play. So starting off, we have the leftmost Vault Hunter, which seems to be the Vault Hunter of doubles. In the first trailer, we got to see him bring up this digital visor and then use these 2 big blue blades. So it seems one of his action skills is a melee action skill where he's dual wielding these big kind of cybernetic blades. And we got to see multiple different angles of this. They do look pretty cool. But then we got to see him use a bunch of different things in the new trailer. One of the first things is that it seems he pops another action skill because in the first person view, it seems that digital visor comes out, and it seems he starts to either dual wielding, so kind of like Gunzerker, or he's bringing out this other weapon that's specific to the action skill, but it still allows him to keep his normal weapon out and use that as well. It seems like the new weapon he brings out shoots out kind of this big elemental explosion, but it could also be that this is Gunzerking and he just brought out another weapon that he already had equipped, so we're not 100% sure, but this is kind of the second area that seems like he's the character of doubles. The first one, he's dual wielding swords, now he's dual wielding different weapons. And then continuing on with the double aspect of this character's toolkit, later on in the trailer, we see him throwing a TDR weapon, and instead of throwing 1, he throws 2. Now what's interesting is usually when you get up to like legendary rarity items, they usually have much more unique and cool looking weapons, and that's usually when you would get something like a TDR throwing 2 instead of 1. This looks like your most bog standard TDR weapon that doesn't look flashy or unique in the slightest, but he's throwing 2 of them. So again, seems he can double up on most aspects of the game. And then in another part of the trailer, where it's kind of hard to tell if it's actually this character, but it does seem to be, this character is kind of floating through the air. We're not sure if this is some other action skill or if this was just a character maybe using the grappling hook and this is how much time you can stay in the air, because we do know there's going to be some amount of air floating after you grapple. There's also going to be mid-air dashing and stuff, so you can stay in the air for a while, but this character is using a rocket launcher, and if you notice, every time he shoots this rocket, it shoots out 2 rockets instead of normally what would be 1 rocket. So it seems it's the same character and he's shooting rockets and it's doubling the rockets, continuing on with this seems to be the character of doubles. And then finally for this character later on in the trailer, we get 2 different things that shows him doubling abilities even more. So first off, he's using a gun with a double barrel, but if you slow it down or screenshot it, you can see that he's shooting 4 projectiles instead of 2, and it's a double barrel. So it seems like he's doubling the projectiles of the weapon. But then what's also really interesting is in the background of these shots, you can see what seems to be a grenade he threw blow up 2 different times. Both of these grenade explosions have multiple grenades that are tracking on enemies, but you see 2 different separate grenade explosions before all of the different projectiles come out. So it seems like he can also double up his grenades, which would be absolutely crazy. But I did also see a comment on Reddit that proposes a really interesting idea. So this person says grenade, TDR throws, rockets, and of course bullets are all considered projectiles by the game in Borderlands 3. Abilities that doubled the projectiles simply doubled the weapon stat for the amount of projectiles shot. What's possible is that Gearbox added a new ability that doubles any projectile when it is created. That way that would include anything from grenade projectiles to TDR throws, etc. And I think this is actually a really interesting possibility, but I don't think it's going to be some like ability this character gets. More so, it's probably going to be like a new keyword in the game, which is basically just a modifier. In most RPGs, you'll have some amounts of keyword. If you've ever played like ARPGs like Diablo or something, pretty much everything in the game that can interact with something else is a keyword. So an element would be a keyword, multiple projectiles would be different keywords, and there could be some new projectile keyword which allows you to just apply this doubling to pretty much everything in the game, which would be really, really interesting as a character. I would fully expect if this is something really big in this character's toolkit, that there's probably some downside to doubling everything. So you maybe do less damage with, say, a grenade. That grenade is obviously doubled. But that brings us to the Siren, and we didn't really get to see her use much action skills in the first trailer, but it seems we have 2 different action skills or abilities she'll have from the second trailer. The first one being, it seems like she kind of charges up this purple blast in her hand and kind of sends it forward slightly, and the enemy it hits, she pretty much completely flays. There's a lot of gore in Borderlands 4. Like half the things you see hitting enemies in this, the enemies just kind of blow up. You see full rib cages, you see like full brains and stuff like that. So really crazy gore. But this ability legitimately seems to just flay this character. And what's also interesting is it looks like this energy she's harnessing for this kind of melee blast seems to be coming from those canisters she has on her wrist. Now it could just be how the animation is, but it looks like there's little lines of energy coming from this canister device, which is going into the blast she's creating in her hand. There's a lot of really interesting possibilities of why this Siren would have this power kind of built up in her canisters, or how this is all going to work, but this first ability seems really cool. It did also seem to maybe have a small AoE effect, because for being this just kind of small melee blast, it has this big kind of circular animation over the character, so there may be some other element tied into it. Now the second thing we get to see her use is really cool. She basically summons up a copy of herself that's kind of floating in air that looks more like a wraith, because it also doesn't look like this copy of herself has legs, but it's also wielding what looks to be a really big scythe. So I could see a couple possibilities with this. Maybe this is legitimately you have a a summon, like maybe you're a necromancer, which is something a lot of people have been theorizing now, that you summon this copy of yourself with this big scythe that just kind of runs around and hits enemies, or maybe you just summon it in place and it's a big sweeping AoE attack in front of that copy and then she goes away. So there's some pretty interesting possibilities, and I would personally really love if there's more of a necromancer playstyle to this new siren. And then next up we have the big guy, and we get to see two different action skills from him. The first one we were able to see from the first trailer where the robots come out and they create these two different elemental axes. In the first trailer we see him throw one of the axes, in this trailer we see him throw the other one, so we do know he can choose which axe to throw, whether it be fire or frost, but we don't know if he's able to just run around and melee people with these axes. Presumably there will be a lot of different augments, so maybe on a higher level augment or something he's able to throw both, or maybe there's an augment to where he can't throw them but he can just melee with them or something. There's a lot of possibilities with these big axes. But then in this new trailer we also get to see him use a new melee ability, which also looks pretty interesting. So first off, this ability as well has the little robots come out and kind of create the thing he's able to use. This one, it seems the robots are coming out and kind of buffing up his fist, because this is a big melee attack where he lunges forward a little bit and does this big haymaker melee attack that not only hits the enemy he's trying to hit, but it also does a big back blast of fire. Now what's also interesting is his first ability, so his two axes are fire or frost. This one we only get to see a big fire back blast and it only brings out one fist. Maybe there's the possibility to change this to frost, or maybe you get to choose between bringing out like one fist or the other with different elemental types. This seems like a really strong melee ability, and the back blast of fire seems to be pretty big. So it seems like you're just hitting a character with a big melee and it does a big AoE cone behind it. And then finally, we have the last Vault Hunter, which seems to be an ex-maliwan soldier. We only get to see her use one ability, but it's very interesting how she uses this ability and what it does. So first off, when she uses her ability, she kind of brings up this temporary mech suit. Doesn't seem to be a full mech suit, but it's kind of this mech suit where she has what looks to be two different triggers and these two different pieces that come out from the top and the bottom. It kind of looks like this is the start of being fully encased in a mech suit. So maybe one of her abilities or augments just allows her to fully be in this mech suit, which could be really cool. But the animation and attack this mech suit creates is so cool looking. So first off, it's kind of this energy blast that looks to kind of have a center, but it has all of these little shapes everywhere around it because it's kind of creating a ball that are all different colors. You see like every color of the rainbow within this big blast. And then she sends out that big blast and this big ball of all these different colors at an enemy. It goes through the enemy, keeps going, and when it blows up, it looks like a nuke. So it really looks like Roland's old ability where you could basically shoot out a big old nuke. It legitimately looks like this massive nuclear explosion. But what's also super interesting is the enemy she hits looks like he's debuffed with every color of the rainbow, which is super interesting. And this also makes me think that this character is going to have the ability to kind of have every element or every status effect in the game, because it applies all of these different colors to this enemy that looks like she's debuffing him every different element possible in the game. So there's a lot of really interesting possibilities with one character being able to apply every element or status effect in one action skill. And I do really like this ability just because of how crazy it looks. You go in this temporary mech suit that you kind of charge up this big multicolored ball that you shoot forward, goes through enemies, applies something to them, and then blows up in a nuclear blast. So this is just a really over-the-top ability that I think just looks really cool. But that's pretty much all of the action skills we got to look at from both of the trailers we've gotten so far for Borderlands 4. And I'm really happy that they're continuing with the multiple action skills that we got in Borderlands 3. I'm hoping that at least one, if not all of the characters, are able to choose to use multiple action skills at a time, kind of like Zane. I've always thought that Borderlands 4 could use more abilities to use and be able to mix and match them. I think it's a pretty high possibility that we also get the different different side augments we got in Borderlands 3 where you could augment your action skills even more, and with the confirmation that the skill trees in Borderlands 4 are going to be the biggest of the franchise, I'm very much hoping to see a bunch of different ways to change up your action skills, make them do different things, and hopefully use multiple of them at a time. But that's all I want to go over, so thanks for watching.